So pumpernickel is one of those types of bread that I kind of associate with cold weather. So I don't make it that often during the year, maybe 2 or 3 times, but I really enjoy it. So we'll go through the ingredients to start with. 100 grams of rye flour, 450 grams of all-purpose flour or bread flour, 50 grams of whole wheat flour, 3 tablespoons of cocoa powder, 1 teaspoon of ground coffee, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 3 teaspoons of yeast, 1 tablespoon of caraway seed, 1.5 teaspoons of oil. This happens to be extra virgin olive oil. 3 tablespoons of molasses, 500 milliliters of water. Now the molasses, you can use either blackstrap or cooking molasses. It doesn't really matter. And the rye flour happens to be coarse. You can use fine as well. So first step is to combine our flours together and then all of our dry ingredients. And we're going to whisk those together. So we'll whisk the 3 flours together. Add our yeast. There's no real specific order for the dry ingredients. I always add, the flours first, obviously, and then it doesn't matter from there, really. You're going to combine them all really well after this, before you add the liquid ingredients. You'll also notice in my ingredients I had a small amount of ground coffee. Now, I use caffeinated coffee. You can use decaf, but it does add a nice little touch of flavor. It's in quite a few recipes to add either brewed coffee or ground coffee. So, it all gets absorbed into the dough. You don't have, grits of ground coffee in the loaf at the end. So there's no worries about that. But yeah, you can use decaf, you can use instant coffee, but it does, it's part of the flavor profile. So I do encourage you to include that in the ingredients. Okay, so let's give this a really good stir. Get everything well incorporated. Now, I always use a Danish dough whisk to, at this point, after I do the whisking of the dry ingredients, once I add the liquid, these dough whisks work really well to combine the flour with the liquids. A lot easier than, say, a wooden spoon or something, which I used to use, but I find the dough whisks are kind of purpose-built, so I encourage you to pick one up if you can. Again, you can use cooking molasses or blackstrap or whatever you have on hand. And this is just room temperature tap water, 500 milliliters. This is going to sit for 10 to 12 hours, so you do want room temperature water and all your ingredients to be pretty much close to the same temperature. Gives it a bit of a head start for the yeast to start working. But you don't need to use warm water. So because this is fairly heavy in terms of the ingredients, you want to give it a good working over, but you're not really doing a knead, you're just kind of mixing it all together. So don't worry if you see that there's still a little bit of dry bits here and there. That will all get worked together during the no-knead process over that amount of time. So just kind of give it a good mix for under a minute or so, but don't worry too much about missing a few spots. It's amazing what happens over the amount of time when the yeast starts working with all the other ingredients. And typically caraway is used in most pumpernickels, but if you're not a fan of caraway, you can omit that ingredient as well. So kind of scrape down the sides. It's going to be a very gooey and kind of wet dough. So I always bring everything into the middle and then kind of punch it down a little bit and get it all into one mass. And you don't need to check on this once it's going, once over that 10 to 12 hour period. You don't need to really check on it, just let it do its thing. The less you disturb it, the better it is. Another thing about pumpernickel loaves is you can always bring them to a party and cut them into cubes for fondue, or make it into the traditional spinach dip bowl that people make. So it's a kind of a specialty bread. It's not one you have all the time, but it's nice to make and bring along. But this recipe is pretty consistent and it's not very difficult. So we're going to place that in a draft-free area of the house and let it sit for 10 to 12 hours. And there's the temperature ranges for what they typically note as room temperature. So you don't want it in a cold area like in your garage or anything. Stable temperature for that amount of time. And there you can see all the bubbles, so signs of active fermentation, and it kneaded itself, so very simple recipe. So you want to flour a work surface, and we're going to turn the dough out on that surface. It's kind of funny, it's almost like a brownie, looks like a brownie dough at this point, because you know the moisture has darkened all the other dark ingredients. So, but it will lighten up once it bakes, at least on the outside. So just kind of flour your hands to help kind of punch it down. And now there's not a lot of air in this dough, not like typical white breads, so you don't have to do a lot of punching down, just more forming and kind of working it for 30 seconds or so. And I always make it into a round dough, but you could shape it into a longer loaf if you needed to. Now I use a Dutch oven that happens to be oval. I also have a round one, so I like this one. It's a little bit bigger. I'm going to place some parchment paper down below. And this also helps to remove it from the Dutch oven as well. So we're going to place it inside. Then I just grab a pair of scissors and I trim off some of the really high spots of the paper. But you want to leave enough for you to grab with, obviously you're going to be wearing something to protect your hands because it's going to be piping hot once it's done baking. But yeah, you just want to maybe trim off an inch or so, but leave enough to grab. So we're going to let that rise for 30 to 45 minutes. Now this oven happens to have a proofing cycle, so just the fan comes on and has an element that gets slightly warm. So, but you can use your oven light as well, or a warm area of your house. But give it, about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. You have to kind of check it and see. It's going to be different every time. So it's looking good. It's almost almost double in size, but we're going to take it out because we want to heat up this Dutch oven. While we're preheating the oven, we're going to put this in and let it heat up with the heat of the oven as well. So that'll kind of give a nicer crust on the bottom of the bread. So set it to 350 Fahrenheit or 175 Celsius. And once it finishes preheating, you can place the dough back into it. But for now, we're going to cover the dough with a clean towel. Okay, so obviously you have something to protect your hands, and carefully place using the parchment paper edges. Place it straight in, just drop it in. And the reason I kind of pre-warm my cast iron is, it does take a while for cast iron to come to temperature, so this kind of gives it a head start. So you're going to bake at 350 Fahrenheit or 175 Celsius for 55 to 60 minutes. Now this is going to be different every time, but about after 45 minutes you want to have a quick look, but generally I've found after 55 minutes it's pretty much done. Okay, so this is the tricky part, getting it out, but it's not too hard. You just kind of lift up one end high enough to get your hand under, or a spatula or something, and just place it on a wire rack. So let it cool down. You can see it's caved in a little bit. It's not perfect, but the taste is what matters really. Some people will take the lid off the last 10 to 15 minutes to give you a nicer crust on top. So I don't do that, but you could. I think what happened, it overproofed a little bit. That's why it caved in when it was cooling down. So, and here I'm cutting it fairly thick. You can use a bread slicer and a guide to make them thinner slices. You can also cube it, like I said, for fondue or for dips. But it's a nice bread. It's nice to make once in a while. And there you go. So thanks for watching, everyone. Please subscribe and stay tuned for the next videos. Bye for now.